Hi again, Alex Manier here with Common Sense Firearms Training out in Las Vegas, Nevada. The purpose of this video is we're actually going to talk about one of the things that kind of gets flown over and a lot of people don't really give it the kind of attention that it should probably get. And that's talking about our index and our reloads when it comes to administrative loading, emergency reload, tactical reload, any of those reloads. That index becomes something that's so very important and people kind of blow past it. But the thing that's nice about that is that there's actually, I've seen a couple different indexes out there, but there is one that I tend to lean more towards. And the reason we do that is because it's actually designed in the way and in the ergonomics of it to help reduce any possible malfunctions that might come. And it does it in a way that requires less thinking. It does it in a way that requires less dexterity. It's basically trying to dumb it down, and common sense tells me if it's stupid, then it's easy. So that's what we're going to try and do. Okay, what we want to try and do is we want to try and dumb things down to the point where even under stress, it's not that difficult. Okay, because remember, under stress, everything becomes difficult. Tying your shoes is going to be the hardest time in your life you ever had to tie your shoes. Not that you should tie your shoes when you're getting shot at. But what we're going to go into is the index itself, and we're going to kind of show you here how the index works, why it does what it does within a firearm, and again, the why factor, which is the big deal for us. We really want to kind of know why we do things, because that why factor, once we identify what it actually is that we're doing and what it accomplishes, it makes it a lot easier for us to accept that it's probably the right method to use. So what we're going to do first is I'm actually going to go ahead and we're going to clear this out. Okay, we have an empty firearm here. Okay, should be able to see in the chamber there too. So what we're going to be using for the purpose of this is we're going to be using these orange dummy rounds. Okay, these are plastic. There's nothing. There is no propellant. There is no bullet. Okay, so when we talk about, this is all we're going to be using. All the mags, they're loaded only with dummy rounds. Okay, so no bang bang possible right now. The reason why we're doing this is we're going to kind of show you again how the rounds can play out within the magazine itself and in the course of the load. The first thing I want to talk about with the load itself is going to be what's called a workspace. The workspace I wish was more universal, but unfortunately I've seen a couple different versions of it. So when we talk about that workspace, okay, if this is our shooting position, then remember that the idea of a workspace is that we keep our heads up and we can identify targets and threats, and we're keeping our situational awareness, okay? That's very important in today's world, because anytime you do something down here, you're literally not only telling yourself that it's okay to do this, but you're subconsciously telling yourself that it's okay to do this under a bad situation when it's not. You need to have your head up, you need to be watching what's going on, and then what we need to do is we need to move the firearm up into our workspace so that we can watch it up here without having to take our eyes off of the threats. This is a good workspace, okay? I can keep my head totally erect, I'm very visually aware of everything that's going on around me, okay? And then that mag well, which is the area I'm about to work with, is directly in line with where my line of sight is as I look around. Okay, that way it's not down here and I don't have to drop my head even this little bit. Okay, it's all right up here. I can see everything. Now, I've seen people who will actually put their workspace so close into their face that, again, if the idea of a workspace is to increase your visual surroundings, then what good does it do to have an obstruction right in the middle of your face? Okay, the other thing that I don't like about this is the muzzle tends to go completely skyward. And if you are a law enforcement officer and you're working inside of a building and you don't know if anybody's up there and this ends up being something that you do, under stress, man, if you forgot to take that finger off, then you just literally cranked one off into the ceiling and who knows who's up there. Okay, so we still have to keep it, the safety rules still apply regardless of what's going on. We have to keep that muzzle in that perfect awareness at all times. And by keeping it down here, we can actually see where it would probably hit if it was to go off. And that will give us the references that we need in order to maintain safety. Okay, so when we talk about that workspace, the best thing to think about is just if my normal sight line is right there, then when I do my workspace, if my sights are right here in alignment with my line of vision, then when I turn my workspace over, you can see it actually brings the magwell up into that same line of view, because this is now what I'm going to be focusing on. And the reason why we're focusing here is simply to make sure that we don't have to do any fumbles about this. Because granted, I'm looking around, but the difference is that instead of having to drop my head and pick back up and look for something, all I have to do now is change my focal point to that, and now I can see what I have to do, and once I'm done with that, I just change my focal point back to the other objects that are important. Okay? So when we talk about that workspace, it's up here. It's not here, okay? It's not down here. It needs to be up here where that situational awareness happens. Another thing to think about when we talk about carbine operations, a lot of guys who run carbines also run pistol. And if your carbine is here, when you do your reload, you actually see that the mag well comes right in here, okay? Well, if you think about the pistol, it basically puts that magwell in the same area. Okay, so consistency really helps. So when we talk about that, this is our workspace, okay? Now, when we bring up this index, there's 2 points of reference. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually show you those points of reference on the magwell itself. The first one is obviously going to be, this is the forward spine. Very easy to know because that's where the bullet points, along the front. Okay, so all we're talking about with the forward spine is just the flat portion along the front that's in line with the bullet. And then some people will tell you to reach up and touch the bullet, and this is one of the kind of, I don't want to say old school, but it's one of the older methods. What they're doing when they reach up there and touch that bullet, twofold, they're checking that there's a bullet there, and the other thing is to, if it's moved forward, they're reseating it. That way, when it goes to be put into the firearm, it doesn't have the possibility of being popped, because as you can see, this no longer falls in line with what would happen in the magwell. And we're going to show you that here in just a second, a little bit closer. Okay, so that's the first point of reference. Now, what I will tell you is that when we talk about this, some of the newer versions, you might not necessarily need to touch that bullet. Okay, and the reason why, and we'll show you, is when we do the reload, we've actually identified a different way that kind of negates that problem. We like things to be as simple as possible. Okay, so the biggest thing we need to talk about here when we talk about that is if you hit the bullet, that's great. Okay, but the most important thing is that you have that reference along the front, because this is basically guiding where the bullets are about to go. But there's a second point of reference that really is important, and that is along the palm of your hand here. Okay, I've seen some people who they get so worried about, especially people with smaller hands or longer mags, they get so worried about touching that bullet that they actually get a very minimal seat down here on their palm. What this translates into is that once it's lined up and they're actually pushing it in, they don't have a whole lot of palm on there to create the motion they need in order to create the force to lock it into place. Whereas if we just worry about having it along the front and we think about this being dead center on your hand, then when you put it in and lock it in, you're literally using the full force of your bone structure along your forearm to push that mag into where it needs to go. Okay, so those reference points really become important, because this can become a problem, but if you just address something else, and we're going to get to that in a second, if you just address how you put it in the gun, you can actually fix that. So it doesn't necessarily matter so much. And then the other thing we'll talk about is when they say that you should be feeling out that there's a bullet there. Well, again, if we're bringing this up right into my line of view here, I can look and see that there's a bullet. So you're still achieving that objective. When we talk about matters of seconds, honestly, it's one of those personal preference things again. My personal preference is that I know for a fact that if I have to go for an emergency reload, my emergency reload is always going to come from the front pouch. This one's our emergency mag. It's the first one we load. We know it's going to be there for us. It's the last one we touch. So whenever we do our loads, we always come from the back until we actually need an emergency reload or a speed reload, simply because we hit slide lock in a bad situation. That way we can guarantee this is always there. What we're going to do now is we're going to show you guys what we're talking about with that load process, okay? And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about how we actually rack the slide, okay? I don't like the term rack. I like the term power stroke. It has become a little bit more predominant, so I prefer people to use that, because the power stroke motion is something that it doesn't matter what handgun you pick up, it's probably going to have the best effect for working for you. Now, when we talked about that touching the bullet, okay, when we talked about that, the rule of thumb behind that one was that you would press the bullet in to make sure it's lined up, and then the loading mechanism was that they would line up the back and then rock it forward, and that's why they had to ensure that this was not pushed forward, because if we lock it back and do it forward, you can see where that becomes a problem. Okay, and in fact, if you continue on and actually pop that loose under stress in a speed situation, you actually end up with an inverted round inside of the magwell, and you cannot manipulate the gun anymore. You've literally caused a malfunction. So what we need to do is we need to identify how we can fix all of that without having to add steps. And the easiest way is, again, I don't even need to touch the bullet, okay, with my finger, because I'm going to make sure that my palm is what's really getting that good grip on there, so that I can get a good, firm, swift motion when I insert it, okay? But by having that forward finger along the front, not even touching the bullet, and then instead of going back to back, I'm just going to point my finger towards the front. What that does is it actually helps seat the bullet for me. So when we talk about seating that bullet for me, I don't even need to worry about this anymore. I've literally cut out a step, which adds things. So again, we can see now if I were to rotate that in, you're going to have a problem. Whereas if I just come from a forward angle, it takes care of that problem all on its own. Okay? And the other thing that's nice about that is it gives me all of this palm here to do your firm seat, as opposed to trying to do it down here when your reference point was lower. Okay? This becomes a little bit more difficult and it might not lock. Whereas if I've got a full firm grip all the way on my palm here, I've got my full force of my entire forearm bone structure driving into that mag well to guarantee that it seats. And then the other thing we want to talk about is when you do your seat, you don't want to you don't want to do any bounces, okay? What happens with the bounces is we end up getting not necessarily always a seat. So you'll try to bounce it, might not seat it, and then you end up with that problem where the mag will literally drop free. And sometimes it'll even stay in there because it's got a little bit of tension to it, but when you go to power stroke it, it does not chamber around, okay? So I'll push that bullet again forward a little bit here. So we come up with our index, and if we got that good palm grip there, and just point forward, it seats the round for me. I get a firm seat. And then when we talked about power stroke, again, we want to try and make things as caveman as we can possibly be. So we're just going to rotate this over and get our whole palm along the entire back of this and all 4 fingers, okay? Another nice thing about having my workspace right here, as opposed to some places will actually have their hand still out when they go to do their insertion. Okay, well, if that's the case, the power stroke becomes kind of awkward since you've got your hand stuck out here for so long. This is much more comfortable and much more natural. So when we come up and we insert, if I just rotate it over, all the palm, all 4 fingers, and by having your elbow bent here and up in this workspace here, what this actually allows you to do is not only can you push back with this hand and do a good power stroke, but if it's something that's a little bit more difficult and you're having a hard time operating the slide, you can actually create a second motion to increase the amount of force you're applying to it by punching your other hand forward. Whereas if your hand is already out, that's no longer an option. So we're giving ourselves options by bringing it in here. Okay, so when we do our power stroke, we can actually just power stroke here. You saw the elbow went forward a little bit. I punch myself on the shoulder, and then we don't want to try and muscle this. You're thinking about it in terms of you want to go fast. The faster you do it, the easier it'll be. The more you try to handle and muscle it, the more you're going to be fighting with the firearm. And we don't want to fight with it. The other thing that's nice about this is that we can trust the fact that these firearms are made from quality manufacturers. So as long as you can get that slide to go back, the spring will do what it's supposed to and ride the slide forward. That will pick up the cartridge and insert it into the chamber. Okay, so we come out, we're going to start up in that workspace. Workspace is right here, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and put that round forward. Even with that round forward, insert, it seats it for me. I don't have to worry about that. Power stroke. Okay, and then if I do a press check, you'll see that it's in place. Okay, the things that matter with that is that, again, if I've got my finger so high along this mag that I can't get the firm seat along the palm, then I won't be able to get a good push. Whereas if I have it just kind of along the front here and I got that whole palm, I get to apply 100% of that bone structure force directly into the base of that mag. And then the other thing that's nice about this is by simply applying a forward motion here, I've negated the fact of if this is inverted and it twists this way, that becomes a problem. Whereas if I just point forward, that solves the problem, and I don't even have to worry about it anymore. The final notes on that is just, again, when we talk about that index, we talk about those good reloads, you want to be able to make sure that you're using as much of your ergonomics and as much of your bone structure to guarantee that you're getting those good swipes, those good motions, and you're getting as much force applied to the areas where it needs to be applied, and you're doing it in a way that requires very little thought, and it's very easy and very smooth. So by simply applying that method of our index and then coming from the forward push, getting that firm seat, changing your workspace up a little bit, and then applying your elbows to the method, you can accomplish really good reloads, very smooth, very productive, and they'll be very consistent, which leads to success. Okay? Thanks for watching. Make sure you get out, get educated, and stay safe.